Hello, everybody. Day two, and I'm already seeing some familiar faces from yesterday, so I apologize for anybody that was here for my spiel yesterday. However, I'm equally as thrilled as I was yesterday to be taking the lead, if you will, at least from the Jose Cuervo side. My name is Jaime Salas. I'm the head of advocacy for the agave portfolio within Proximo Spirits. And at Jose Cuervo, we wanted to deliver a message out to the trade, and that is that there are no strangers. By that, we mean, this is a perfect example of an opportunity to get together, gather, exchange, as well as interact with one another. So we are very excited to be part of this community, open up the floodgates of conversation, and more importantly, help support this taking place through sponsorship, et cetera. So today we're supporting the creativity and hard work of menu creation and innovation, which is actually a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. So we have two folks here who are going to walk us through and talk a little bit about their process, which I'm excited to hear. So I want to make sure I get the last names. I said this earlier. So we have Trevor, Kallies, right? And Alexis, Belton, which you, of course, are all familiar with. You're all part of the same crew. Well, great. I'm excited to hear from you guys. I'm going to hand this over to you and to everybody else out there. Salud and cheers.
Sure. Thanks, Jaime. Hi, everybody. You guys all know me, or I know most of the names on the list. There's definitely some strangers in the group. I just want to welcome everybody to day 2 of Tales of the Cocktail, specifically to the CAP networking sessions. This is like a fun way. Typically, we do these sessions when we're all completely exhausted from a full day of work and we're sitting in some kind of boardroom or some kind of ballroom. So definitely looking around, it sees that most people are in a pretty comfortable space, which is nice to see. I want to thank everybody in advance for their time today. And then also just want to give a little bit of a background as to why and what we're going to be doing today. So, I mean, obviously these sessions are hyper important because it's peer-to-peer and then it's person to person. So we want to make sure that, everything we offer today is pretty transparent. Again, we want to make sure that you guys can get the full extent of what the topic is and whatnot. And knowing myself and knowing Alexis a little bit, there's definitely going to be some digressions and some tangents and some diversions from the actual topic, but it's definitely going to be fun and informative. So a little background on me. My name is Trevor Kallies. I am the beverage director for the Donnelly Group. If you guys have never been to Vancouver, Canada, you probably have no idea what that is. It's been around since 1999. I've worked for them since 2005. We've got a variety of concepts, everything from sports bars to cocktail bars to nightclubs to pubs to restaurants. And, we've, in the last couple of years, we've diverted to barbershops. We've got a cannabis line and most recently skincare. So it's very much a lifestyle brand. I specifically work on the pub and cocktail bar side. And my job is literally everything liquid. So I'm basically the primary buyer for the bar, menu selection, product purchasing, staff training. I wear a ton of hats in the company, but the fun part of my job is obviously, figuring out what that next big drink is going to be, and encouraging people to explore a menu and teach them something new. So, Alexis.
Heyo. See some people I know on here. It's good to see everybody. I am based out of Chicago. I am currently the bar director for the Aviary out here. I was not affiliated with the location in New York. The Aviary is a part of the Alumni group, so a larger parent company that has Alinea, Next Restaurants, Royster, the Aviary, the Office, and a couple of new projects that we are working on, probably opening next year, where we are partnering with the St. Regis in a larger building here in downtown Chicago, which will have 5 to 6 new bars and restaurants in it. So a pretty busy year ahead of us. Unlike Trevor, I don't do too many crazy things within all of the venues. I am primarily at the Aviary and the Office, in charge of kind of day-to-day operations, training, hiring, ordering, the usual things I think that most bar managers kind of take care of for businesses. And then my boss, Micah, actually is the beverage director for the entire group. So he handles a little bit more outside of the Aviary and helps focus on other aspects of beverage operations for some of our other stuff. So I'm strictly aviary. I don't know, do you need anything else from me? Any other information I missed?
That was great. I just want to let everybody know, you probably saw the recording thing pop up that this is being recorded. I also just want to let everybody know that it'd be great if you open up the chat side of the Zoom window and feel free to chuck questions and comments in there that you'd like to answered or responded to. Definitely going to take some time near the end to answer them. But if something comes up that's on topic while we're having our chat, we'll make sure that we speak to that as well. So just to kind of get going on the topic, I personally feel when I'm looking at menus and trying to figure out exactly how to go, I mean, there's a number of different ways. I mean, we've had places that have been open for 20 plus years. So there's never a new menu that comes out. There's just menu adjustments. But we also are often in growth mode. So opening up new bars and new concepts in new cities. So I've always found there's a bit of a balance, whether or not it's a seasonal menu, a new concept menu, or it's basically just a small adjustment to change a couple things. Alexis, when you guys are working on new cocktails, let's say if is your menu adjusted seasonally? Is it done calendar to calendar based, or how do you guys look at menu changes?
I would say seasonally is a good way to describe it, but not seasonally as in like, I mean, yes, what's fresh in season right now, but because Chicago has such major seasonal like weather changes, we kind of follow those patterns a little bit more closely. So looking at things that are better for fall, winter, in the sense that like it's cold here, what's warming, what's got those flavors that are going to be a little bit more warming, and then transitioning into spring and summer, thinking about people being out on patios, people being out, they've been cooped up in their homes forever, what's bright and welcoming. So while we do select for, you know, like what fruits are in season, what veggies are in season, how can we look at it that way? I would say our major changes happen right before fall, winter, and then again, right before summer.
Yeah. And then within those seasonal cocktails and the seasonal menus that you guys are doing, how much do you tend to deviate from like it's winter, give me something strong, stirred and spirit forward versus like, you know, it's a business. I want somebody to come in and drink 5, 6, 7 cocktails instead of sipping on one for an hour and a half. Like,
Yeah.
how do you guys play that?
So we definitely, we do that. There are some things that are sometimes not seasonally appropriate on the menu, but like you said, you have to think about the people that are coming in and they want to enjoy 5 cocktails and they're not going to want, you know, 5 bouquets back to back. So we do take that into account. I think we still try to play into things that are more appropriate for winter. So like, for example, maybe we have something that's bright and carbonated during the summer that's got like cucumber and honeydew. Maybe we still have a bright, dry carbonated cocktail, but maybe we try to figure out a way to use like root vegetables or darker fruits and stuff like that. So while we still want to appeal to people that are, you know, not trying to drink heavy spirit forward cocktails or hot cocktails or like toddies or, you know, flips and stuff like that, we still try to make it appropriate for what that menu looks like during the winter.
Yeah, I mean that's it's pretty similar to how we work up here in Vancouver and Toronto as well. I mean, basically, when it comes to, you know, I imagine that anybody on the call from like, you know, Mexico to California and those more like farm heavy places, the access to fresh produce and fresh fruits and fresh vegetables is a little bit different. I mean, the food miles attached to everything that comes to Vancouver are obviously in the thousands. I mean, strawberries are amazingly delicious, but they're basically in season in Vancouver and BC for about a minute every year. Same thing with like lemons and limes are definitely not local. So we have to play around with a lot of restrictions on what we can actually get, right? And you know, we're very touristy as well. So when people come to Vancouver, it's very cruise ship driven, when there's no pandemic involved. You know, the majority of people that are exploring our bars are coming from afar. So they are coming to Canada perhaps for the first time. They're looking for things like maple syrup in cocktails, or they're looking for like those Canadian flavors that they've always looked to. But yeah, seasonally doesn't really make a big splash in our venues. We want to make sure that, you know, my primary goal is to sell a lot of cocktails, you know, so we definitely don't go into, stirred strong spirits for a lot of the time, because the profile of a lot of our venues are definitely like, at some points they turn into dance clubs. So we want to make sure that like everyone's got that refreshing long dry beverage like you described fully year round. With the places that I manage, majority of them are large capacity, like large volume. So sometimes up to upwards of like 250 people, and not a ton of organization in terms of like where people might be sitting. Capacity is 250. There might only be 185 chairs because that's just the way the bar goes. Think like Eastern Standard on like a game day where it's just like 4 deep at the bar, big and boisterous. A lot of my drinks have to be ready to have someone not be able to put them down. Like they have to basically hold them for their entire experience. Your stuff tends to be a little bit more experiential, where you've got like a device or a service vessel that lives up to the drink. Granted, I don't think I'll ever be able to get to that point in most of my locations, but when you guys are dealing with the experiential side, how much do you need to consider from like initial concept in your head to final product at the table of how that's going to look, feel, smell, taste like?
So it's funny that you asked this, because I was actually talking to somebody about this not too long ago, about how you kind of come up with an idea and from concept to R&D to like final stage. When I started at the Aviary, we had a lot of backlog of glassware and serviceware that was like specially made for Alumni or the Aviary. Especially when the Aviary opened, there were some service pieces that were very specific to what we were trying to do. So I feel like I lucked out in that sense that a lot of the stuff was already there and all I had to do was fill it with a cocktail. However, as we find ourselves repeating the usage of some of these things, and some of them are meant to be repeated, like we always have an In the Rocks cocktail on the menu, which is the ice sphere that gets cracked open. It's never been off the menu. We never run out. It's always on the menu. The same with the coffee siphon, the same with the glass double-sided window porthole infuser cocktail. So some of these things, they just rotate through, as we said, seasonally. We change them from hot to cold or whatever's inside of them, etc. But sometimes we do have to think about like new presentations, and that's always been really, really hard for me because I would rather focus on what liquid is filling the vessel rather than the vessel itself. So it's something that I've had to like really try hard to try to figure out. But when it comes to these things, you're right. People are generally seated. They have a big table. They don't have to put something down unless they really want to put it down in that moment. A lot of our things are meant to be on tables for the entirety of enjoying them, simply because they are more fragile or they have a bunch of moving parts. We don't want someone standing around and waving these drinks in the air. Even our former standing area in the Aviary, which was kind of a big gallery space, is now all seated just because of the nature of how our bar works. And then we have our bar downstairs, the office, which technically could have people standing, but because the space is so small, it doesn't really allow for it. So even though you could have a bartender doing bar service and making drinks and passing them, people standing, in line behind the person at the bar, the space just doesn't call for it and the room doesn't call for it. So we've never had a need to have to try to figure out what's a safe glass for someone to use. Can they stand with us for 30 minutes? What happens if they put it down? We have a little bit more leeway in the sense that we can afford to have $100 hand blown glass that if it breaks, it really sucks. But the chances of it breaking are very low because there's always a place to put it down. And someone's always there to either let you know, like, hey, enjoy this way, or come and take it away from you immediately when you're finished with it. So that's kind of how our service works in that sense, if that made sense.
It totally does. You actually brought up a really interesting point about, filling the vessels that already existed versus coming up with the new cocktail. Which is like, that's pretty much how I want to do too. Like, that's pretty much it. Like, we've got our glassware program that's stock and standard across all the venues. I don't want to create any new implements, mostly due to space. Like, real estate on a back bar is just so valuable. I mean, you guys have your whole entire kitchen area, which, yeah, in my world, that is just like unattainable. It's massive. I've been to the Aviary once. well, a couple times, but like just looking at your cocktail kitchen area there where all the prep and everything gets done, it's like, doesn't feel like you guys have any lacking of space. Does it ever come up that you guys are like,
Not having space,
yeah,
yes. Yeah, because we share space with the Aviary kitchen, but we also share space with our sister restaurant next. And so like the walk-in is the bane of my existence. I am like the self-dubbed like walk-in troll. Like I'll go in there and when I get to work and I'll be like, who's on our shelves? Like why is there? And the thing that always comes up is and I think a lot of people that have been there for a long time have learned to figure out how to make space if none is available, which it's like kind of incredible at this point. It feels like you're snapping your fingers and a whole nother shelf is appearing. But now someone will come up and they'll be like, hey, like I can't find space to put this thing. And I literally will be like, do I need to go find space for you? And they're like, no, we'll find space. And magically some things get shifted around so that you maybe eliminate something that's not needed. Maybe you're looking at how much of this thing do we actually use? Do we need all of it? Can we store it? And so it kind of puts in motion a little bit of, yes, we have a lot of space, but it's all taken up. And so you start cycling through, how can we consolidate what we have? How can we make better use of our space? And how can we be smarter about it? We have these big old drawers on the expo bar line where you pull a drawer open and it's full of 25 glassware in a glass rack. And we have, I think, 12 of those drawers on one side. That's a lot of space for glassware, but you would be surprised how quickly you run out of that space. And you got to figure out, okay, how do we make this space actually work for what we need for service? So we're not, crushing ourselves later by removing something that we use a lot of, or do we have too much of something? And it's funny because every time a new freezer comes in, every time a new shelf is cleared off, every time a space opens up, it's like real estate in New York. Somebody's right there to be like, that's mine. I claim that's mine. And it's funny how quickly, as fast as you can get space, it's gone immediately. And so I think we've found really creative ways to utilize the space and or make better use of the space that we already have.
And then how much of that is just you and Micah fighting over space with versus or with the kitchen guys? And then how much does the rest of the team need to get involved in that?
Typically it's me, and I don't want to say it's because Micah's the nice guy, but he gets to play good cop pretty much 99% of the time. And I am like the muscle or the henchman that comes in behind him. And I'm like, no, that's not going to fly. And so I think people have just kind of learned over time that I'm not super lenient about it. Like I'm nice and I'll share, and I want everybody to, be able to work well. But I'm also not the person that's going to, if I know it's going to cause issue for our team, I'm not going to be the first person to just like give something up. I think I learned early on that, yes, we're a team and we're all on the same mission, but I think some things are a little bit sacred in a sense. And I think that sometimes you have to it's like kind of like, I don't want to say it's like setting boundaries or putting up, personal spaces, but it's almost like that's a personal thing of mine, or that's a space that I utilize, or it's something that's kind of sacred to me. And so I think I've learned to be like, I'm okay saying no. And a lot of people are like, yes, take whatever you need, do whatever you need to do. And I'm like, well, actually, if you do that, it's going to cause X, Y, Z to happen. And it's going to create a lot of work on the back end. So like, let's not do that. But it's a little bit of give and take. So for every time you say no, I feel like there have to be a couple of times where you are willing to say yes and work with somebody and maybe give up something of yours, temporarily or for a little while, and maybe find another use for something later on. So it's a lot of back and forth. I feel like give and take.
So when we're talking about changing up our menu, thankfully we've come to a more of a calendar approach now. Not necessarily, like I said, not necessarily seasonal, but after coordinating with the executive chef, we're trying to do 2 major launches a year. So a spring, summer, fall, winter, and then a couple of my tweaks in between if a cocktail's not working or if something, isn't driving with a guest or whatnot. So right now we're actually approaching mid-October as our next launch for the fall winter side of things. That conversation for the first time ever started in late August. So now I basically, started thinking about our menu 3 months in advance before we're actually supposed to launch it, which for me, that's new. I mean, my calendar fills up pretty quickly. I've got so many other things that I'm on the go. So idea generation for cocktails typically takes a back seat. I mean, as much as I'd love to say that all I do is come up with new, exciting, and delicious cocktails, most of my life is like you know, the nuts and bolts and the financials of the bars instead of like the good part, which is menu ideals. So this is the first time I've ever actually had a long time to actually think about what my next menu is going to look like. When you guys are looking at your menus and like changing up whenever that calendar is going to set up, like how much time do you typically give yourselves? Like, do you launch a menu and then immediately start like thinking about the next edition of it? Or is it more so like, we'll make this up as we go along? Or is it like the menu launches next week? What are we doing?
I think it's a little bit of all of those things. And you got to keep in mind that I think people organize in their brains differently, and people, the way in which you conceptualize or, you know, R&D, everybody's kind of different on how they approach that. And so we have 3 managers that are approaching a menu from 3 different angles. And I personally think that's really cool, because you might have somebody really on top of it and somebody who's kind of dragging, and somebody who for every 4 cocktails, you know, you come up with, they come up with a half a cocktail. I think that all of these kind of play into it. I am somebody who, and I'm not joking when I say this, year round, 24/7, if I read about like a cool flavor profile, or I eat something, or I taste something, or I go somewhere and I see something cool, it was in a magazine, it was on an Instagram post, it was in a movie from the 80s, whatever it might be, I have like on my phone an app, it's called To Do, and I have a drink list where I just start taking notes for things, and it's so long now. I was actually thinking today I need to go through and clean this up, but I like to go back through there from time to time and look to see if there's anything appropriate to replace something on the menu, something that maybe I want to work on that I'm not going to have a lot of time just around. Because like you said, a lot of times people think that if you're a bar manager, that your job is to sit around and R&D stuff, and that's all you get to do all day long. And it's actually so much more. That R&Ding and menu creation becomes 10% of your day to day, and 90% is filled with literally everything else that you can think of. And even if I go into work saying, today I'm going to carve away 3 hours to work on this, I end up having 10 minutes to myself, because that's just how the day works out. And so I'll start going through here and I'll start to think about when I can find time to do something. I'll start writing ideas down. I'll take a pen and paper and I'll start on a notepad writing down different recipe ideas for those flavor profiles, so that when I do find the time, I'm not like starting from ground zero. I've actually kind of built myself up to start putting things together. I'm also the kind of person where I don't like to just go into work and say, here are my 2 flavors. We're going to do grapefruit and vanilla, and those are my flavors. Now let me just start throwing things together. My brain doesn't work that way. I literally have to sit and write, okay, what kind of base spirits am I looking at? How many different directions can this go? If I have grapefruit and vanilla, do I want to add something else in? Do I want to carbonate it? Do I want it stirred? I kind of list out and map out my ideas first. And then when I can get into work, I can start kind of carving away which of those ideas actually make sense. What's going to work in that moment? Do I have a glass for it? Is somebody else already working on something similar? Okay, I've hit a wall. Can I bring in somebody else to start helping me on this idea, get some fresh eyes on it? And so for me, it's like all consuming all the time. But then for someone like my boss, Micah, he can say, oh, I want a rhubarb cocktail. And 30 minutes later, he's got one. I think it really depends on the person. And like you said, what they're doing at work every day. And there's such a thing as like palate fatigue. It's real. After you've made a drink so many times and maybe it doesn't work, or you're in kind of like an R&D, brain block. Sometimes all you want to do is step away for a few weeks and not think about making drinks and just focus on like operations or other things, and then come back at it 3 weeks later and be like, okay, I have an idea. Let's put this together. Now this makes sense. I feel refreshed and my brain's kind of running again. But like you said, how much time do you give yourself? Because if you take a break for 3 weeks and you come back to it, is it already mid-October? Is it November? Like,
it's a different season, and then all of a sudden, like when you had that idea to use quince in a cocktail, it's like, the quince is already come and gone for this year, and you got
that has happened before. Yep. It's a real thing.
Play with that fruit anymore. You mentioned rhubarb as well. It's the same thing. Like if you don't have a rhurbarb idea in July, it's not making it on the September menu. That's a fact.
Yep.
You also mentioned that like the 90-10 about like 90%, 10% of like the work life and whatnot. I find that is exactly me, except it's more like 99-1 when it's like menu generation and balance. So like if I don't actually give myself that 1 minute a day to think about a cocktail or think about a concept, it's like it's over. I also treat our menu in that 90-10 realm as well. So when we're putting out cocktail menus, again, cocktails are, I would say about 25 to 30% of our overall sales are actually cocktails. Spirits in the form of like vodka sodas and rum and cokes and whatnot, they tend to overlap when it comes to liquor sales. We're very like, I'm in Vancouver, which is essentially like the beer capital of Canada. So like majority of people coming to our places are drinking draft beer, which is phenomenal because I'm in love with beer as well. But when I look at a cocktail menu, that 90-10 rule, I play with that as well. So like if I have 10 drinks on a menu, 9 of them are going to be for the guest to really love and drink a lot of and appreciate, you know, bright colors, fruit forward, never sweet. Majority of guests aren't looking in Canada for specific, aren't looking for a sweet cocktail. I mean, 9 out of 10 people that come into the bar will order, like, let's say if they're ordering a margarita, we'll say, oh, margarita, but like not sweet. The palate up here is definitely on the drier side, but that 9 cocktails are going to be for the guest. I restrict like 1 cocktail for like that weird obscure ingredient that I want to work with, or that weird plating or whatnot. When I first started doing menus back in 15 years ago, when I first got to write my own menu, it was reversed. It was like 90% of the cocktails were like these weird, obscure liqueurs that no one had ever heard of. Like, you know, back in 2005, I'm messing with chartreuse, which was like brand new for our market. You know, what's Amaro? Oh, I'm going to use this one and this one and this one in a cocktail. And we noticed that it was that one cocktail that had the strawberries in it that got ordered over and over and over again. But I was giving 90% of the menu to myself, which is just insanely egotistical and just not right for what we wanted to present at the time. So now when I look at a menu, I obviously want to present a menu that's 100% delicious, but I'm only trying to teach the guests something 10% of the time. Does that ever come up with, I mean, you guys have a much like broader focus when it comes to like cocktails and whatnot. I think you guys can get away with a lot more given like the concept that you guys are playing with, but does that ever come up in conversations when you guys are doing R&D that we have to appease how they do that?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, especially when you're maybe a younger creative, or it's your first time creating a menu. All you want to do is be like, look what I made, look what I can do, like look at all these cool ideas that I have. And while that's awesome and excellent, I definitely agree that like the menu is not for us. We're not the ones drinking, we're not the ones spending money. We are the creatives behind it. But even in showcasing that you can do simple really well and it's something that gets ordered a lot, I think that says a lot about a bar program. I've walked into bars where you read the menu and you're like, even as a bartender, you're like, some of these are too weird. Like all I want is something super crushable, something easy to drink that I can order a few of. And, you know, sometimes you walk into a bar that does that really, really well over and over again. And I always appreciate when I can go somewhere and the menu is written for the people coming in rather than the people who have built the program. I think it says a lot about, you know, the people running the place when it's not about your ego and showcasing that, like, you know, at some point you got to think that if you're running a bar that you've probably proven also, if you're putting a menu together, you've probably proven that you are very capable of balancing, creating, doing really cool stuff. And while our menu can be a little strange in places, like there are some things on there that are not for everyone. For every one weird drink that we have on the menu, and I don't even want to say weird because they're not necessarily weird. They're just not common. They're a little bit more polarizing. There are 5 or 6 options that are incredibly easy to read, easy to drink, that are not intimidating, that make guests feel like they're in the right place. And that's the other thing about a menu is if you walk in and everything reads is like super intimidating, hard to understand, techniques that nobody really knows about, and it's like this giant science experiment, I feel like you kind of, at that point, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like you're not going to have repeat guests. Not everybody wants to come into a bar and learn about the 10 different techniques you use to clarify whatever you are making for that one cocktail. Like some people are really into that and they will find their way to you and they will find you specifically, but most people want to come in and have a good time. And you know, when we first, it's myself, our other bar manager, Darmel, and Micah. And when I think the 3 of us plus our other manager were putting drinks on the menu, there was very much, it felt like a fight to prove maybe a little bit, you know, whose drink was better, who had the better palate, who was the most creative, And as I grew out of that and realized that I didn't really care too much about that, I just wanted to see the things that I made getting ordered, being enjoyed, and getting ordered again. That was what was important. We transitioned into this menu that's now, it feels very cool. Everybody's got their own path. And one thing that always stuck out to me is Leo Robichuk came in like 3-4 years ago with this guy, and I believe his guy's parents, and they were down in the office, and I had a moment to pop in and say hello. And I'm sure all of you have heard his name before. You know, he runs, you know, some of the best bars, you know, internationally, and he's definitely somebody that I look up to in the sense of, you know, a manager that can kind of do it all. You know, he can create menus, he can mentor people, he can open these successful venues. And as somebody coming up in the bar industry, I was always like, wow, that's incredible. And he was like, hey, how are you? How's it going? And we chatted for a minute, and he's like, I just want to say, he's like, this is my first time coming into the Aviary. And he's like, this menu is like insane. He's like, what you guys are doing right now is really amazing. Everything we tried is great. The menu like really jives together. He's like, this is probably the best menu I've experienced here since I've come back. And for me, knowing that that menu now belonged to 3 or 4 different people who came at the menu from so many different, you know, perceptions and ways, it was one of the best compliments that you could have possibly gotten in that moment, because while he's a guest in our business and he didn't know who made what drink, I did. And I knew that it was an equal endeavor on the parts of 3 or 4 different people who really wanted to just make good drinks that people wanted to drink. And it was very much a turning moment in realizing that like the menu needs to be for your guests, like you said, and not for yourself as the person creating it. And I think that that's always stuck with me because of the compliment that we received that night. So that was a tangent, but yes, I agree with you.
I mean, that's a phenomenal story too. I mean, the person that you looked up to came in and complimented your menu, and you know it was probably expected because you guys produce delicious, right? But and it's always great to hear that people that you respect are coming in and saying positive things about your drinks, right? I think we've all been on the other side of that coin as well, where it's like someone comes in and doesn't enjoy a drink that you worked like super hard on. And then, you know, I remember back in the day when it's like literally every bar was producing their, you know, their own house bitters. They were smoking literally every second drink, you know, the days of like producing your in-house this and your you know, doing something weird to the lemon juice to do something that only you and your 3 select key people on staff are going to recognize that it actually creates a different flavor. It's like, those days are like not necessarily attainable for everyone to continue to produce in every single bar. And you really have to read the room. You have to understand that, you know, not every guest is going to come in. And like one thing that I learned real simple, it's like if a guest can't pronounce a word, they're not going to order it because they don't know what that is, right? It's like when you read the back of a bag of potato chips, like I'm not really into whatever that is, so I'm just going to put that back and get the all natural thing as well. And then the other thing that I've tended to kind of struggle with is like passing that information on to the rest of the team. Like this, like I don't work physically in any of the bars full time normally, but getting that information of how this drink was created and the steps that we're taking to get from point A to point B, I have to rely on like the lowest common denominator, the newest staff member, the person who's trying to learn all of the nuts and bolts about the room, the music, the lighting, the atmosphere, the history of the company, the history of the bar that they work in. So like, I can't be too complicated in demanding that they are able to explain all of that to their guest when the guest asks a question. So it's got to be the easy button for like all of these different things as well. So I've always had to keep that in mind. Like if I'm trying to train my staff on how we make our in-house bitters, like I've lost already because they're not going to take that time. They don't have time to spend that time at the table as well, especially when they're being challenged to, you know, sell all these other things about our venues as well. So you mentioned that it's you, Micah, and then 2 other bar managers that are in the menu development side of the business.
It's Micah, myself, and Jarmel. Ingy was formerly a bar manager when we were around the time when we were opening up the New York venue. But he has since moved back to Florida. It's been about 3 years since he left us, but he's old alumni who came back to work for us. So he was somebody that was with the company for a long time before. But there's the 3 of us now.
So you guys are the ones in the, the R&D lab trying to figure out exactly what that next bet. When you guys finalize everything, you've got all your menu set up, you've got, your prep methods all set out, ready to go. You're ready to introduce that menu, that next edition of the menu to the staff to start training. I have like 2 questions. A, what does that process look like? And then B, Zara's question in the chat, how do you make sure that everybody is going to buy into that new edition of the menu?
So to answer your first question, and if I'm being completely candid, I wish that we had better methods for disseminating information. We are a very large company with so many people that I think that we forget sometimes that the educational side of the part where you are taking the time to teach about something is very valuable to a lot of people, because like you said, if you are trying to explain house-made bitters to somebody, to explain the cocktail that you made, you've probably already lost. But if you can reach a point where you've taken the time to step-by-step start educating people about some of the things that you do in the building, I think when it comes time to introduce something and you explain that we had distilled or we had centrifuge, people are much more keen to understand the processes behind, and they can just immediately like jump to the next level, which is what is the flavor of the cocktail. I think it also gives a lot of confidence to the people that are having to talk to guests about this stuff, because if we're back here and we're like, well, we clarified this one thing, and then we centrifuged this one thing, and then we distilled this other thing, and then we made this house tincture, and then we made this crazy 17 ingredient syrup, and then we put it all in a blender and we snapped our fingers and here you go. I think that that's a little intimidating for people to then have to go and explain to guests, especially when our back of house and our front of house are very divided. Our bartenders are technically back of house employees. We don't talk to the guests. We don't service the tables. We are strictly in charge of making things. It's a production, it's a process. Beyond that, we have a large prep team. We have a huge ice program. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, but we're not tasked with having to explain everything that we're doing. And while a few of us can, I would say that 80% of the people that are newer or starting out are probably like information overload. So personally, I wish we had better ways and means to distribute the information, especially if they're techniques that we consistently use and things that we're always turning to. But also, I think that there just needs to be a level of understanding that, like, when it comes to teaching people about cocktails and what we do, that it's a step-by-step process. People are going to make mistakes. They're going to get an ingredient wrong. They're going to not correctly describe forced carbonation, and like, that's okay. I think at the end of the day, if we give them like a little bit of, I like to do like quick, when you talk about like searching on the internet and you have like buzzwords, things that like hit like key points, I like to kind of be like, you can use buzzwords, like find things that you're comfortable talking about that like explain what it is, or find a way to explain how the menu is laid out differently. Like you have ice focus, you have presentation focus, you have spirit forward. I like to say this, kind of like start small and figure out what's going to help you during your first, few weeks, few months, start to understand like what we do better here, but also make you comfortable on the floor and confident talking to guests. And I'm like, and if you don't know an answer, like, it's okay to be like, hey, I don't know what that is. Let me go get somebody that does. And like, I'm happy to bring out one of our bar managers to talk about X, Y, Z with you. Because if they really want to geek out, then like, go for it. So that's kind of point A, I guess, is we send out emails. We say, here's this drink, here, look at it. It's the first time you're seeing this glassware or anything that's in this glass. Now learn it and take it. But the other part of that, to Zara's question, is achieving team buy-in to ensure the menu is successful. This was a big thing that we did not do very well for the longest time. When I started at the Aviary, everything was a secret. Nobody could know how to distill except for one person on the team. Like, everything was so heavily guarded. And I don't know if it was because our industry was so new to these techniques that they only wanted a few people to be like the masters and the keepers of these things, or if it was a matter of people being afraid to share knowledge because that meant that somebody else could come in and do their job for them. Because I was on the receiving end of that, when it came time to start allowing other people to learn, I was very much like, if I don't have to distill something, that clears me up to go do 17 other things. I am happy to show you how to distill, because at that point, I think that distribution and being able to delegate as a manager is much more important than being the keeper of the centrifuge. Like, I don't care that much. And the more people know how to use it, the more efficient the team is, the more well-versed people become, the more educated they are, the more excited they are to learn about other parts of the program. So we very much like to bring people into our creative process. I want to show as many people as possible the back end of things. We also used to be like, you have to have been here a year before you can be on the prep team, before you can handle any of the ICE program. That went out the window right as the pandemic was happening. And when we started hiring people, I was like, great, you've been here 2 weeks. What do you want to learn next? Like, let's get you dirty. Like, let's put you where you want to be. And so I think all of these things have created a much better like team environment. People aren't afraid to ask us if they can learn something new. They're not afraid to actually bring us menu ideas now. People used to be terrified to say, hey, I have this idea. Can you help walk me through it? Nobody wanted to do that ever. And now people are like, hey, I have this menu idea. Is this a viable thing for the menu at the Aviary? And it's like, yeah, let's talk about it. Like, where do you want to go with this? What direction do you want to go? For the first time in, I think, 7 years, the guy that's been running our AM ice room put a drink on the menu. He's been with us for 9 years. He's been with us forever. And he finally put a drink on the menu, brought it up to us, and was very proud of what he had done. And I don't know what caused that change to happen, but it's a really like brilliant thing to see. It's a really fun thing to see. And immediately every other person on our bar team, like their eyes lit up like, whoa, I can do that too now. So I don't know if we made that happen ourselves or if it's just the evolution of our bar program and our bar team. But I hope that answered your question, Zara, in that I think that it's important to start at the bottom, on the back end, and educate and teach people, because then they can actually come and say that they want to buy in. You're not forcing somebody to sit at that table. You're not asking somebody to do something that they're not comfortable doing. You're giving them access to something that maybe they do want to be able to do. And I think that inviting them to be a part of your program is much better than either closing that door or forcing somebody into something. So I hope that made sense.
I think it totally made sense. I mean, I remember when we first started bringing in like obscure juices into the cocktail program, like I was literally going in to work like an hour and a half earlier than I normally would have, doing all of the juicing of all these weird things, like, you know, not weird, but like different for our time there, and delivering those juices to all the bars around the downtown core just to make sure that it was getting done right. And it was like, okay, well, how do I take this from the next step? Like, and not, I don't want to juice green peppers anymore. Like, and this is like a complete waste of my time. Invested in getting those like an actual juicer for each of the bars, which is a new item for them because basically they didn't need one before, and getting them on that path. Suddenly these guys had this like different realm that they could play around with. Like, okay, well now I've got a juicer, like what else? They're seeing it happen. So it's not just a green juice showing up. They're the ones doing that product, right? And as much as like fresh juicing is not for every bartender, I get it. Like not everybody wants to sit on the juice team and do that prep work, but the ones that do are going to be inspired by that. But to get those juicers in house, you're talking about like, you know, anywhere from, you know, $700 to $1,500 per appliance, and doing all of that for 9 bars at the same time is a huge budget item. How often does like R&D budget come up in your conversations with your team?
Hardly ever.
Oh.
It's something that should probably be talked about more. But when we talk about the luxury of things that we have been given at the Aviary, I think that monetary discussions are something that don't happen often enough. I think that most of us are pretty logical, and when we understand that something's going to be it's going to cost a lot either on the end of labor or the product itself. We have to find ways to maximize whatever that's going to be. Whether it's, upcycling the waste from a product or trying to find a way to reuse it, or if the labor is incredibly high, finding ways to cut down labor in other ways. So there's never open conversations about how much does it cost to R&D, or is this thing expensive? I think that's very internal for each person, that we are just kind of watching it, saying like, okay, I did this thing. That costs a lot. I need to cut back somewhere else. It's kind of, I guess in a way, it's like budgeting, if you will. We just don't openly talk about it. Every now and then, someone from our business team will be like, hey, this thing's really expensive. What is this? And we'll be like, it's blah, blah, blah. And they're like, all right, go about your day. And that's about that's the extent of it.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have the advantage to have a lot of toys between the 3 spaces as well, right? So there's probably some cross utilization that you can do, like from Next and Alinea, which sounds nice.
Yes, except we don't let them. We usually try to like, if there are clean people and there are messy people, and I like to think that the Aviary group are clean and everybody else is kind of messy. And so we've had times where we've like shared products, or when Alinea was working next door on their progression menu that they had when they were being renovated, they took over the space next door, and some of the shops would come over and use stuff. And I'm just like, yo, like what is going on upstairs? It looks like a bucket of strawberries exploded, and then you got to go find the person. And it's like, so like we do share a lot of stuff, and we do try to find ways to like I said, maximize the product. But then there are certain things where, like you talked about, buying a blender. We have a blender that no one else is allowed to use. And I'm like, if you want a blender, you need to go get your own, because I know what you do to blenders. Like you guys are over there blending rocks and we're over here blending purees. Like, so there are certain times where we have to be like, okay, let's spend a little bit more money because we're going to give this product longevity and a really long, nice life. We're going to take care of it. And I know that they're going to blow through 7 blenders in the time we have one. So there is a little bit, but sometimes we'll get like a cheap thing because we know it's going to get destroyed immediately. And we're like, that's okay.
The kitchen team at Brassfish, which is one of the bars we have in Vancouver, they refuse to get their own fine strainers, and they refuse to get their own funnels. So I literally have to play hide and seek with those 2 items every single time we're doing juice prep, and it's a nightmare. So suddenly it's like, I don't even know what they're straining in my fine strainers. I just like, what is this, and why is, like, please just go buy your own. When it comes to setting the menu prices, who does that?
Whoever has created the drink is usually in charge of pricing out the menu item. A lot of times what happens is if it's the same presentation, if the ingredients are similar in price, the price kind of stays the same. And generally, most of the things will stay the same because things are kind of like easily sub in and out. 1 gin for a whiskey, that's the same price. Where we like to look at a little bit of price inflation is if there is something incredibly labor intensive or incredibly expensive that's going into it, we will reevaluate and reassess based on that. There are several points in the year where I think we actually go through and we kind of look at basically we price out the cocktail, and we kind of look at, is it still in line with what we're pricing it at right now? Is it in line with the other items on the menu? Is it in line with what's going on in Chicago? So we do try to look at that as well, when we can. But every time a new drink goes on, typically it's a replacement for the one before, and the prices are very comparable, and we just kind of go with it.
Blend into the next, yeah. I know there's a couple brand people online today. Do you ever have to have conversations with brand reps and people who are responsible to get their product on your menu?
Not usually. We sometimes get like, I don't want to call it a sales call, to people that we haven't worked with in the past. It'll be like, hey, can I come in and meet you? Can we taste? And we're generally like, yeah, sure. Like, we're happy to do that. We are pretty open to using spirits. The reason that we don't brand on our menu, I think, is it becomes less about the cocktail and more about the brand at that point for us. And so honestly, sometimes when we're building things and it's this is a gin-based cocktail, we'll build it 4 times with 4 different gins, and the person who made the drink will blind taste it and be like, this one tastes the best, and we'll go with it because that's the product that made the drink taste the best. We also have times where we've had to sub in and out products because something's been out of stock. Like we've made our own Saint Germain before. Like it's, we were out of stock for 3 weeks and we're like, okay, we have this really incredible, very expensive elderflower syrup. Let's find a way to stretch it. Let's fortify it. And let's figure out a way to make this cocktail work for the meantime. And we need to do that so we don't have to take it off the menu. But I think that what we found, especially through the last couple of years, when everything has been out of stock, is that there's usually a comparable product or something that you can make on your own or something that you can adjust that is not going to change the drink where the guest is going to notice it. If anything, it's going to be a small minor thing that maybe you notice on the back end. Like you're like, the mouthfeel's not the same. The botanicals aren't exactly the same in this gin, but the drink tastes the same. And so we have been finding ways to kind of like go around things that way too, which is also why we don't brand, is because a lot of things will get subbed in and out. We like to split base. And we do have some brands that I don't want to say that we're loyal to, but that we have used over the years because they're great products. The people that represent them come in and they are actually our friends. They spend money, they support, they bring their friends in. And it's not even because it's branded on the menu. I think it's because they believe in what we do. And then we are even more keen to support those people in turn. We also try to spread the love. So, I mean, if you look at our menu, I feel like we try to get a lot of different brands in, a lot of different people in. And we have no problem if someone's like, hey, you know, can you taste this new gin that, you know, we're bringing out, and it's a better, you know, it has a better home in the drink than the one we were using before. We have no problem switching something out. So for us, it's not about playing favorites. We don't get a lot of people that come in and they're like, put our brand on your menu. I think people understand that we're very like flavor focused and less about naming off the product that's in something.
Like putting that billboard up that says you're using this particular vodka or this particular gin.
Yeah, it's like a luxury brand logo, like Louis Vuitton or Gucci or something. And like, yeah, people want to buy into that more if they see that it's this logo. But like, I don't think that we have to play that game at the Aviary the same way some other bars, I think, actually enjoy doing that, and not in a bad way. That's just, you know, for them, that's a sales point, is to brand, to get people to come in and buy something, you know, to deplete something on their menu, you know, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, our menu has to be branded to get that movement of the products, right? So we're like, you know, if it's Beefeaters are Beefeaters is going to find its way into a couple cocktails, and it's going to move that needle for our partner. We also have back bars, which I don't remember you guys having do you guys have a back bar in the Aviary? Like something visual that the guests can look at and be like, oh, they've got like Macallan, whatever. Yeah, so like visibility is big as well for like the higher end stuff. So basically it's like one part what can make it on the cocktail list, but then one part what can be on the bar as well. And that's a really tricky slope, because for us it doesn't always make sense to have all these different brand extensions of all the different flavors of, you know, brand X and all the different combinations of everything else. So it's like we have to be very like picky and choosy as what's going to take up that space on the back bar. You know, the person coming in to, you know, flog their biscotti flavored cream liqueur because it's part of our, you know, program with that agency. It's like, it doesn't really make sense. Like for us, picking the brands that are going to make sense the most in our cocktails and in our cocktail menu, we have to have dedicated space for that. If it's just going to sit there and, you know, be visible to the guests, but then collect dust because no one's ordering it and the staff aren't selling it, like